We have been spending a lot of time over the past couple of weeks talking about the amount of Pokemon cards that have been printed over the past couple years. We know that there's been over 18 billion Pokemon cards that have been printed between 2021 and 2022, a number that they printed because they simply wanted to make sure that they met demand. Pokemon has always printed to demand, and a lot of people have started comparing what is happening now with Pokemon to the junk wax era for sports cards, for comic books that happened in the late 80s, early 90s, where a ton of different companies just started producing and printing all these different baseball cards and comic books, causing the values on a lot of those products to just remain stagnant. They didn't really increase at all because there were so many different copies. On Friday's video, and if you haven't watched Friday's video, I highly implore you to go back, watch Friday's video. You do have a chance to win a Pokemon 151 booster box as part of Pokemon 150 Fun Day, which we do every single Friday. All you have to do is just subscribe to the channel, go back, leave a like and a comment on that video, and then every Friday you just keep coming back to see if you are the winner. But we spend a lot of time going over the amount of alternate arts that we believe are in existence. And what we've done is we took basically a breakdown of the amount of cards Pokemon has printed and utilized pull rates that we have for different rarities, so that way we can determine how many of each rarity is in existence. And by breaking things down by the amount of alternate arts and the amount of alternate art VMAXs in each set, we're able to kind of determine, hey, assuming these are all printed the same, we should have X amount of Tyranitar V that have been in existence. Now, that's not to say that that's how many have been opened. It is to say how many have perhaps been printed during that 2-year stretch. There's a lot of product that is being held, a lot of product that hasn't been opened, a lot of product that even hasn't been purchased yet, and because of that, a lot of these alternate arts still haven't even been made their appearance as of yet. However, there is no lying and no denying the fact that there are a lot of copies of these cards in existence. And why I want to cover that is because there is a lot of attention that gets put on values of Pokemon cards. And I think it's great to look at values. And the reason I think it's great to look at values, and the reason we spend so much time talking about the Pokemon market, is because I firmly believe that as long as you feel like you're getting a decent deal and you feel like this hobby is affordable, that you are going to stay in this hobby for a long time, for the foreseeable future. You're going to enjoy the hobby more, and you're not going to feel like you're getting ripped off. You're going to feel like you're making smarter decisions when it comes to obtaining your collection goals. However, modern is meant to be enjoyed. Modern Pokemon is meant to be loved. And there's a lot of stuff that we can go and we can look back at when it comes to vintage Pokemon and older sets that we can kind of make assumptions based off of how modern is going to perform in the future. But for the meantime, you should really enjoy the artwork, the competitive game, and the hobby, the collecting spirit when it comes to modern Pokemon cards. If you spend too much time focusing on money and on values and looking at the swings and the peaks and the valleys of what goes on during a Pokemon card market that's just extremely dynamic. It's going to swing up and down all over the place. It's extremely volatile. It goes with the economy. It goes with how things are performing out in the economic times. You're not going to have a good time. You're just not going to enjoy yourself if you're constantly focusing on those things. So by paying attention to a lot of the details as far as how much Pokemon product has been printed and trying to get an understanding of how many alternate arts exist, while it may not be extremely relevant information, it is information that we can utilize to kind of look back and be like, okay, well, what can we expect from alternate arts in the future? And that's what this video is really about. So what we did is we're going to look at alternate arts and how many of them are possibly in existence. And this is just a guesstimate. This is just guessing games right now. And while I do believe that these numbers are somewhat accurate, they could be off by 10,000 copies, which wouldn't be a huge number, but it is going to be something that's fairly significant in trying to predict the long-term performance of some of these cards. However, if we look at these and then utilize the information that Pokemon has provided us with when it comes to some of those bigger chase cards in the past, we can kind of determine what to expect from some of these alternate arts in the future. If I told you that there were almost 200,000 Tyranitar V alternate art cards in existence, that may seem like an absolute ton. However, when you consider the amount of demand that Pokemon has brought in worldwide and the amount of people who really pay attention, collect Pokemon in the entire world, and then focus in on market saturation and what might happen in the future, it's really not that much. It's really not that much in the grand scheme of things. So I'm going to flip you around so you can see, hey Fanny, you're just making no sense right now. So let's actually look at what you're talking about. Okay, so we're going to break down the 4 sets basically that we covered on Friday without going through all the math. So we've got Battle Styles, which has 4 different alternate art V cards, and then I believe there's 2 different alternate art VMAX cards. So you've got the Empoleon V, you've got the Tyranitar V, you've got the Rapid Strike Urshifu V, and you've got the Single Strike Urshifu V. If we take the amount of copies, the amount of cards that we assume have been printed in the English language, and we break it down and say, okay, 70% of the cards printed in 2022 and 2021 were English, we can assume, based off of pull rates, roughly 191,603 copies of each of these alternate arts are in existence. Not just of these alternate arts, but basically of each full art that was printed in Battle Styles, as long as we assume that alternate arts are going to have the exact same pull rates as what a full art has, a full art trainer or a full art Pokemon. And we've done a lot of math, we've opened a lot of packs, we've looked at a lot of pack openings that supports the theory that Pokemon does not print by unique cards. They do not print pull rates based off of unique cards, but they print more based off of rarity. So if you bundle all of those full arts together, and I go through the math a lot more in detail on Friday's video if you want to look at that, but just to keep things simple and keep things flowing, we're assuming there's 191,603 copies of each of these alternate arts that are in existence. There's 2 alternate art VMAXs in Battle Styles, the Rapid Strike and the Single Strike Urshifu VMAX. We're assuming there's about 155,000 copies of those in existence. Maybe not that have been opened yet, but that were printed basically in 2021 and 2022. Once you get to newer sets like Chilling Reign and Evolving Skies, there is a lot more alternate arts that were printed. And because of that, Chilling Reign, if we go based off of the approximate assumption of how much Chilling Reign was printed, we can assume roughly, okay, there's going to be a lot of alternate arts that were printed out there. Galarian Articuno, Galarian Moltres, Galarian Zapdos, Zeraora. We can somewhat assume that there's going to be over 100,000 copies of each card in existence. 88,556 copies of alternate art VMAXs from Chilling Reign. Blaziken VMAX, Shadow Rider Calyrex. Obviously, there's more than just what you see listed here. There's the Slowking alternate art. There's the Blissey V alternate art, Tornadus V alternate art. There's more alternate art VMAXs, like the Ice Rider Calyrex VMAX. We're just trying to keep things very simple here, so I don't want to overdo the presentation. I left cards off. This is just an example of what we're looking at. So 108,000 of each full art from Chilling Reign, 88,500 of each secret rare from Chilling Reign. If you look at Evolving Skies, kind of the same thing. We're assuming there's going to be a little bit more printed of Evolving Skies because it did have 4 print runs as opposed to Chilling Reign, which had 2 massive print runs. But if you look at Evolving Skies, still a lot of alternate arts in the set, a lot of unique alternate arts in the set. So Rayquaza V, Medicham V, Dragonite V, Sylveon V, and the list goes on of all the alternate arts that were printed in there. We're assuming there's about 137,000 copies of each of those in the set. That number might even be a little bit low. These numbers might be a little bit low. If you look at the alternate art VMAXs in this set, Umbreon VMAX, Rayquaza VMAX, obviously you have the rest of the evolutions, you have the Duraludon VMAX. We're assuming about 112,520 copies of these that were printed between 2021 and 2022. And finally, you have Fusion Strike, which doesn't have as many alternate arts and definitely doesn't have as many alternate art VMAXs, and because of that, there should be more quantities that are available than sets like Evolving Skies and Chilling Reign. You're looking about 235,000 alternate arts from Fusion Strike because there was a much smaller amount of alternate art V cards. You had Mew V, you had Celebi V, you had Genesect V, you had Greedent V. I think the only other one in Fusion Strike is the Sandaconda. And then when you look at the alternate art VMAXs, you have Espeon VMAX, you have Gengar VMAX, you have the Inteleon VMAX, 170, I think the Mew VMAX, that might be it. Maybe 173,128 copies of each of those cards that are in existence. Now, here's why this is important. The difference between Pokemon now versus Pokemon a long time ago is the set sizes are completely different. You're looking at sets that have 250, 300 cards after you include secret rares and things like that. You have a lot more commons and uncommons that are printed now than what used to be printed. You have a lot more promos now than what used to be printed. You have a lot more collection boxes, a lot more ancillary products, and because of that, there's going to be a lot more Pokemon cards that are printed now than, for example, the years 2004 to 2010, when there was roughly only about 2 billion Pokemon cards printed per year. You're quadrupling the size of the amount of cards printed because the sets are so much bigger. Not only are the sets bigger, but you also have more sets that are releasing. When you look at the year 2021, You had 4 main series sets, but then you also had a couple of specialty sets that came out. You had the Celebration specialty set, and you had the Shining Fate specialty set. When you're looking at 2004 to 2010, for example, which is what we're going to be looking at today, there wasn't really any specialty sets that came out. You only had 4 main series sets. Pokemon was not nearly as popular then as what the demand has determined it is now, and because of that, Pokemon didn't have as many sets released, so they didn't have to print as many cards. They could still print a decent chunk of a main series set because there wasn't a whole lot of clutter. There was only those main series sets. So with that being said, we're going to utilize the numbers that we pulled for alternate arts, associate that same math with the years 2004 to 2010, and the reason we're going to do that is because there were some really cool cards that came out in 2004, 2005, 2006 that are extremely valuable today because something like market saturation happened, or a lot of gold stars were opened during the years 2005 to 2006. However, we didn't have focus on grading like we do now. Not only that, but it took a long time for those products all to get opened, and a lot of people aren't involved in the game anymore, don't play the game anymore, don't collect, and because of that, cards may not have been protected as well. Market saturation happens, and you're looking at 20 years down the road, 15 years down the road, there's going to be less copies available of those gold stars than what were opened in the years 2005 and 2006. So how does this break down, Fanny? Well, let me tell you. So since 2004 to 2010, we can expect that there was 14 billion cards that were printed worldwide. We're going to keep this math fairly simple. That stretches the span of about 7 years. We know there's 14 billion cards, so we're going to assume that approximately 2 billion cards were printed per year. Now, we're going to apply the same math that we used for modern Pokemon to those days, assuming that there's going to be roughly about 70% of the cards that were printed in the English language and about 30% of the cards that were printed in other languages. Now, that number could be way off. There could be about 60%, 60 to 40%. It could be 50-50. It could be only 40% printed in English. I highly doubt that's the case. But to keep math the same and to keep the comparisons where you're comparing apples to apples, we want to stay consistent with our assumptions here. So if we assume that in 2005 and 2006, 70% of the cards that were printed were in the English language, that would mean that approximately 1.4 billion cards that were printed in 2005 and 2006 were English. So what sets came out in 2005 and 2006? There were 4 each year. There were not specialty sets. In 2006, you had Dragon Frontiers, Crystal Guardians, Holland Phantoms, Legend Maker. In 2005, you had Delta Species, Unseen Forces, EX Deoxys, and also Emerald. Now, Emerald did not have any gold stars in it. That was the only set that came out in that 2-year stretch that did not feature any gold stars. All of the other sets did feature gold stars. The great thing about gold stars that you might not know right now is that pull rates on gold stars were actually really good. You actually got about 3 per case. So you got 1 for about every 2 boxes that you open. Actually, a little bit better than 1 for every 2 boxes, but to keep math simple, we're going to keep it at 1 for about every 2 boxes. So if we assume that market share when it comes to these sets is that Pokemon printed 20% of each of these sets and then had an additional 20% that was printed for energy cards, for promo cards, maybe for some reprints, which they didn't do as much back then because the demand wasn't there, so they didn't have to reprint a ton of product. Product carried over for years to come because it just wasn't the demand. The supply was there that fed the demand for years to come. So if we look at 2005 and associate a 20% market share with each of the 4 sets that released, knowing that the 20% that's left over is going to go to all this random stuff, that means Deoxys, Emerald, Unseen Forces, and Delta Species all made up about 20% of the amount of Pokemon cards that were printed. If we're assuming 70% of those cards were printed in English, that means of that 1.4 million, Deoxys, Emerald, Unseen Forces, and Delta Species each took 20% of that, which would mean about 280 million cards were printed for each of those sets. If we take 10 cards per pack and divide that 280 million by 10 cards, that means roughly 28 million packs of Deoxys, Emerald, Unseen Forces, and Delta Species were printed. Now, the great thing is pull rates like I said, about 1 out of every 72 packs for gold stars. So if we take that and divide it by take the amount of packs that were printed, 28 million, and divide it by 72, because that's the pull rate that we can expect for gold stars, that would mean you have approximately 388,889 gold stars that were printed for each set. Deoxys, Unseen Forces, and Delta Species. Now, if we go over here and we look at the gold stars that are in the set, pull rates and printing is just so different now than what it was back then. You didn't have sets that featured 10, 20 alternate arts in each set where the chase cards were just so numerous. You only had a few gold stars printed in each set. So in EX Deoxys, you had Latias, Latios, and Rayquaza gold stars. In Unseen Forces, you had Entei, Raikou, and Suicune gold stars. And in Delta Species, you had Groudon, Kyogre, and Metagross gold stars. Well, there's only 388,889 gold stars that were printed. If we carry the math over and stay consistent with what we pulled for modern data, that means approximately you're looking at about 130,000 copies of each of these gold stars that were printed. So Rayquaza, Latios, and Latias each have approximately 130,000 copies that were printed during that 2005-2006 era. Same thing with Unseen Forces, Entei, Raikou, Suicune, roughly 130,000. Delta Species, Groudon, Kyogre, Metagross, roughly 130,000. If you apply that same math to 2006, you're looking at the same data, roughly 20% market share for each of the sets that came out: Legend Maker, Holland Phantoms, Crystal Guardians, and Dragon Frontiers. 28 million packs of each, and 388,889 gold stars that were printed. The only difference is Dragon Frontiers, Crystal Guardians, each of those sets only had 2 gold stars. So if you divide the total amount of gold stars printed divided by the amount of gold stars in the set, that would mean you're looking at about 195,000 copies of Charizard, Mew, Alakazam, and Celebi, and then 130,000 copies of Gyarados, Mewtwo, Pikachu, Regice, Regirock, and Registeel. That's if we apply the same math that we're using today to look at how many alternate arts are in existence. That same math, if we apply that same logic to gold stars. Now the difference is, and why this is encouraging and why this is something that you want to focus on, is that a lot of us probably weren't collecting in the years 2005, 2006. They're the dark ages of Pokemon for a reason. A lot of people jumped out of the hobby, weren't cracking boxes, weren't grading cards, weren't saving stuff in closets for like they do today. Today is completely different. However, if you look at how gold stars have performed, and they performed extremely well for a long time, they really started getting extremely crazy. Probably around 2015, 2016 is when they really started blowing up in price. And that's something that's encouraging moving forward if you want to try and draw a comparison between alternate arts that are printed today to gold stars that were printed in 2005, 2006. The big difference is, now we're going to go off logic here and we're going to go off math and assume that there's going to be approximately the same amount of alternate arts in existence as what there were for gold stars. I don't think that we're going to have the same performance of alternate arts as what we saw from gold stars, because the knowledge, the education that we have as collectors now is just so much different and so advanced compared to where it was in 2005 to 2006. When you're talking about market saturation over time, people who held onto these gold stars or continued to collect gold stars throughout the years were able to persevere those conditions because they made the decision to grade, sleeve, make sure that they took good care of these cards. A lot of beat up gold stars are in existence. Nowadays, you have a lot more people who pay a lot more attention to persevering, or to preserving, I should say, their copies of alternate arts by sleeving them, grading them, things like that. And you can see that by looking at the pop reports of CGC, of PSA, and of Beckett to see how many cards are being graded, how many alternate art Umbreons are basically being graded all the time. And this is encouraging because this tells me that Pokemon has kind of stayed consistent when it comes to the amount of cards that they're printing, when it comes to the terms of chase cards. For example, a card like Charizard from the base set, which was originally printed in the late 90s, has 40,000 cards that have been graded by the grading companies. So you know there's going to be approximately, assuming that at least half of those Charizards haven't even been printed yet. And if you look at the price trend history of a card like Charizard, it's just performed extremely well with a lot of savage damage being done during the pandemic. As long as you're somebody who's enjoying Pokemon and really just focusing on the fun of modern and not paying attention too much to the values, you're going to stay in the game, stay in the hobby for the long haul. And then down the road, if Pokemon does do something again like what we saw during the pandemic, and I don't expect anything to ever happen again like what happened during the pandemic where things got absolutely crazy, but you're going to start seeing increases in those values, and that means that the decisions that you made for your collection dollars now by paying attention to the Pokemon market but not only focusing on value but enjoying the hobby as well is going to pay its rewards down the road. It's something that you really just want to have fun with and enjoy. But if we look at the math kind of lines up with how many chase cards are printed because there's just so many more of them printed today. Set sizes are so much bigger, and I thought this was just super useful and cool information when you're comparing the chase cards from 2005, 2006 of these gold stars to the chase cards today of some of these alternate arts based off of pull rate data, the amount of commons and uncommons, the amount of promos, the amount of extra cards that are being printed nowadays is just so much more in quantities than what they saw in 2005, 2006. I just find it very interesting data to consider and something that should be encouraging for you as a collector to be like, okay, so there are a lot of alternate arts in existence, but it looks like there were a lot of gold stars in existence too. Those numbers kind of look to be closely aligned. And what that means to me is, okay, so 15, 20 years from now, we may not see this giant increase in alternate arts, but they should at least retain value, which is something that's really important. So that way, if I decide, okay, down the road, I might not want to collect Pokemon cards as much, I might want to get into a different hobby, or maybe it's time to sell off my collection to take care of kids, or take care of my family, or buy a house, or whatever the case may be down the road, at least I know, okay, market saturation, things happen, people forget about it. As long as I stay in the hobby, as long as I continue to pay attention in the hobby for the long haul, this will work out okay down the road. And that's really the big thing, is you want to focus down the road. You don't want to just spend so much time drowning yourself in the value of Pokemon cards right now. When you do that, it just does not become fun anymore. You're going to lose interest. You're going to end up selling off your collection, making bad decisions, taking way less money than your collection is worth because you're frustrated. And then a year down the road, you might want to get back in. You're like, well, holy buckets, I just kind of sold everything off for 40% of what it was worth, and now here it is down the road. I'm probably just rambling right now, but this is just very interesting information to me, things that I'm extremely passionate about, because I have seen so many people just really get bogged down about values of Pokemon cards. And I think Pokemon has done a good job printing throughout the entire history of Pokemon and making sure that they meet demand, not only meeting demand when it comes to normal cards, but also meeting demand when it comes to chase cards. And I think they've stayed relatively consistent throughout the years, and this is very encouraging information to look at as long as you're willing to play the waiting game and be patient in the hobby, enjoy the hobby, and don't use modern as just this get rich quick scheme, which a lot of, unfortunately, content creators kind of pushed over the past couple years. I hope you enjoy the content. If you do, hit that subscribe button down below, leave a like, leave a comment. It goes a long way for the algorithm. Share the channel. You guys are great. I really appreciate you guys. We'll be back on Tuesday with another video. Until next time, peace.